live, so I'm assuming that's true. And I will introduce us for our first ever live stream on our brand new YouTube channel. Hello. Welcome to the But Are There Dragons podcast, a podcast where two friends pick a book at least one of them has not read and work their way through it a few chapters at a time. We have managed to work our way through The Hobbit. By the way, hi, I'm your host, Kritter.
And I'm your host, Jessica. And if you can just give us a shout out that you can see and hear both of us in chat, because this is our very first live stream with our channel.
And oh. Okay, I can see us live on my phone.
I
I've got
can
my
too.
phone
It
here.
looks really positive.
I'm excited.
I'm so excited.
I'm using a different software than my other channel and all of this, so it's all an experiment, but I'm kind of loving it actually. It seems like it's working out.
Light Blinded Fool and Leia. Awesome.
Yeah. So good to see you guys already here. Dana Luhu further up in the chat. And I think somebody, it was Not All Who Wander Are Lost got first, the moment we scheduled, which was super fun and positive.
Awesome.
So yeah, we are here to talk about The Hobbit because we finished season 1 of But Are There Dragons, which was us reading The Hobbit. Jessica reading The Hobbit for the very first time. So I want to lay some ground rules here at the very beginning of the stream. Thing number 1, we are full Hobbit spoilers, everyone. So if you're worried about being spoiled on this old book that has movies, then you might want to leave. I hope you don't leave though. Thing number 2, we would love to hear your thoughts, your questions. We want this to be a conversation with the chat. So I welcome questions, thoughts, opinions, everything, comments about the podcast, all of it. That's what we want. So feel free to just let it fly. And then thing number 3, I don't know if you know this, but Jessica just got engaged this weekend and we're all very excited for her. So be excited for her in the chat, please, because I'm very, very happy. Leia says we both look lovely. Thank you,
I see it. Thank you. And I see Not All Who Wander is still with us, so
not just when we scheduled, but still. I love it. I love that this is the little Discord fam here. Just kind of like everyone who talks about it on Discord is also
I don't know if I can handle it being bigger. Oh, look, there's a random Noman in the chat.
Oh, she got engaged? I know, isn't that weird? I'm so happy that I could be the one to tell you that that's what happened.
Yeah. So, and we did anything. I would just emphasize what Kritter said. If you want to talk about stuff that happened on the podcast or anything that happened in Hobbits, I would ask as the first timer if we could stay away from any future Lord of the Rings spoilers, though, out of consideration for me, because it's not what we're talking about today, but we are going to launch into Lord of the Rings shortly hereafter. So Hobbit spoilers are okay. LOTR spoilers, please no thank you.
Yes, and I guess we'll probably end up saying this at the end as a reminder, but we have decided on how we're going to start the Fellowship of the Ring. So for our first episode, which should come out the first Tuesday of the new year, the first Tuesday in January, which I don't have right now, but I could. Let me see. It's the second. Okay, so season 2 of But Are There Dragons will be starting on the 2nd of January with the before everything that happens before chapter 1. So I think it's like the prologue, the
epilogue, forward, and prologue,
something like that. Yeah, it's
generally,
yeah, the first 3 things. Oh my gosh, I know I wrote it down because it's not an epilogue. Because isn't the epilogue after?
I thought it was too, but it was
epigraph. The epigraph, the forward, and the prologue. That's what we're reading for season 2, episode 1, Fellowship of the Ring. I just today downloaded the audiobook. I made sure it was Andy Serkis again because I'm in love with him now. And there's multiple versions of the audiobook, so that's where we're at. Be looking forward to that. I need to start reading because we'll be recording somewhat soon. and I'll start the outlining. Also, very fun news that we just discussed today. We're going to start kind of gently bringing guests onto the podcast every so often to also weigh in on these things that we're reading. So that'll be a fun experiment for season 2.
Yes.
So amazing. So Jessica, now that we've got all the introductions out of the way, your first and my first podcast. This is the first ever podcast that either of us have ever done. How do you feel?
I feel great. I feel like we learned a lot with season 1.
Yeah.
And we're only hoping to make it better with season 2 from the behind the scenes figuring out our stuff perspective.
Yeah.
I love the crew that we have that hang out in our part of Discord and have been visiting us and giving us their thoughts. And several of them are here on the chat tonight. So that's so awesome. And thank you.
Thank you.
I was blown away by just how fun this was from like a buddy read perspective, because I've never successfully done that before. So
Yeah.
that was part of the challenge going into this, was I going to be able to, pump the brakes and read it mindfully and a little bit slower so that I could enjoy it more. And it really was fantastic to kind of do this with everybody that was kind of keeping tabs with us. It really amped up the squee factor.
It did, and some people in the Discord were providing, like, background context, not
Yes.
spoilery context, but just interesting, like, Tolkien facts and stuff, so that was super fun. So, yeah, thank you all for being along for the ride for season 1, and, we're hoping that you'll stick with us for season 2. I see Wolf Brother in the chat, "What's up?" You looked at my YouTube, understandable, but never
Yeah.
forget that we are on YouTube as a podcast, and we have our own channel, and so if you haven't subscribed yet, you should consider it, because not only could you listen to us every week, but you could also watch us talk, which that may or may not be what you want, but it's there for you if you ever want to see us, basically. If you miss
Yeah.
our faces, then that's your option. So yeah, okay, Jessica, this was the first ever Tolkien work that you read. Obviously, you've seen some movies, lots of the
Yes.
movies, because they're the best.
Hmm.
But how was the reading for you? Was this what you expected? Did it live up to the hype?
So, which hype, right? So,
Okay.
there's a couple of
I don't know.
different scopes of hype that there's obviously tons of folks who identify Tolkien and these works as incredible um, icons in literature. And I definitely agree with that. And I do feel like it keeps up with that. If you think about it from the perspective of this was written in the 1930s, that this is incredible, and we've talked about it in a couple of different episodes, how, to me at least, it's pretty clear how much it's influenced modern day fantasy,
Yeah,
the stuff that we consume on a pretty regular basis,
because we're both fantasy girlies.
because we are fantasy girlies from way back.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of hype was that there are folks who are kind of dissenters, and Tolkien is just so hard to read, and I just could never get through it, and or something in between, right? It doesn't have to be both extremes, but there are folks who are like, Tolkien was very difficult to read, and I couldn't get past point X, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have that experience with The Hobbit. I don't know what it'll be like going into Fellowship. Maybe
Mhm.
Fellowship's a little bit of a harder read. Again, I'm aware, and we've talked about how Hobbit was intended to be a child's story.
Mhm. Mhm. And it's like
Um,
half the length. We just
yes.
started talking about our schedule for Fellowship, and looking at it, it's almost twice as long on audiobook as The Hobbit. So
Yeah.
that'll be different a little bit.
So we're gonna work to find our stride with a beefier book and see what that looks like. So I didn't find him particularly difficult to read, but again, I've kind of qualified with that, with the fact that maybe Fellowship will be a smidge harder. So I really did love it. Um, there were parts that were still a surprise, even with all the media that I've seen produced of it. Um, there's also the fact that I didn't realize how much I had let the movies influence me um,
Hmm.
in a
Okay.
couple of different ways. So it was good to kind of shake loose some of that. But also, I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on the pod. I have trouble with visualizing things on my own.
Mhm.
So having the visuals from the movies available to me helped me kind of do more theater of the mind as I was reading it.
For
So that
sure.
was kind of nice.
Yeah, so we talked. This came up on the Discord, and so now I feel like I need to bring it up just based on the whole having a hard time visualizing things. So I feel like one of the things that I struggle the most visualizing, even though I have read all of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, was the whenever we came across Lake Town and it was described as being built
Yeah.
on piles of logs from the forest or whatever, and in my brain that was literally like a beaver dam essentially was what my mind came up with.
Yeah.
And then somebody in the Discord was like, no, like, first of all, piles has a million definitions, fun fact, but one of them is, whenever it's like a dock, like the
Right.
the poles that docks are built on.
So
which
I had heard them called like pylons. So pylons.
Yeah, pylons,
So
yeah.
yeah.
But in piles, who knew? Who
Sure.
knew? So, like, even people that right, and so if I would've maybe watched The Hobbit more recently, I would remember, like, what that had looked like, and I assume that is accurate to the books, but because I was just reading the books, I was like, "This town is built on beaver dams, essentially. That's gonna fall
Yeah.
over." It's so obvious.
But that was one of the many topics that was fun to kind of hash out in Discord, and there were folks who were awesome and bringing in information in a non-spoilery way. That was a lot of fun to
Yeah.
kind of flesh out. There are a couple here that are longtime Tolkien fans that are
Mhm.
helping get us stuff.
Right. Shout out to Not All Who Wander Are Lost. I believe
Yes.
they've been instrumental in educating us on some of the things that we have
Yeah.
just gotten wrong. But it's fine, because that's part of the reading experience. We also have had a fun little chat about the who all counts as the five armies
Yeah.
that came up in our last episode, and we posted about it on our But Are There Dragons socials, and turns out based on some deets that I can't remember who attached it in the chat. Do you remember? Whoever you are, you're a goddess. I remember anyways,
I
you're
don't
great.
remember,
You're
unfortunately.
amazing.
Yes.
But
We
yeah,
love you.
apparently there's a debate about it. So it's not a solid thing, even though the text, as Jessica says, really suggests that it was the first five mentioned, not including the Eagles. There's some other things that suggest that the Eagles are included and that the wargs don't count because they're part of the
Mhm.
goblins and all that stuff. So like I love getting to read this again and to really just think about these things and try and visualize them again and understand what was meant by
Mhm.
some of these passages and whatever. So it's been a blast for me too, even though I've been around basically. Yeah, classic beaver dam construction, light blinded fool. You get it. That's what you
Yeah.
pictured too, right? It wasn't just
Totally.
me, correct? Okay, so you said that there were what you said. What was it that it corrected your opinion about some things, right? The book.
It definitely influenced some opinions. So I think, and this is not by any way meant to be blame, but I think that the movies are the reason why I had created this false narrative of how much better Thorin was than the way he was represented in the book. It's
Mhm.
not that he was completely without salvation,
Yes.
or completely without flaw in the movies, but I do feel like he was represented much much nicer,
More favorably
more favorably
in the
in the
movies.
movies. And I feel like that line was a lot closer in the books, that he was portrayed as a very balanced individual. We'll put it like that. Like he had his share of personality flaws.
Yeah, I mean, pretty harsh, honestly.
Yeah.
He was like harsh. He was very politician-ish, which makes sense
Yes.
because he's, royalty or whatever.
Yep.
But at times he seemed semi-fair
Hmm.
but then yeah, the harshness was what got me. It was just like,
Yeah.
man, you are not very likable, unfortunately. Yeah, so Thorin said he was sorry at the end, so he's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like getting last rites or whatever.
Yeah. Well, we
Yeah.
talked about that. We talked about, the perspective that being on your deathbed can offer you.
So
Fire
yeah.
Phoenix. Thank you. Not all who wander are lost. Fire Phoenix is the
Oh my
one
gosh,
that
that's
dropped that.
right.
So thank you.
Shout out to Fire Phoenix in the Discord. You're the bomb.
Yeah.
He was much more dwarf-like in the book. Exactly. Yes. I feel like now I kind of knew the dwarves weren't like super dwarfy in the movie, because
Mm-hmm.
they didn't look like Gimli, basically. They were all,
Mm-hmm.
the fabulous hair and whatever, the flowing
Yeah.
locks, all of that stuff. Some of them didn't even have beards, I think. But yeah, Thorin was quintessential dwarf in the book. Harsh, very, very susceptible to greed and, you know, the influence of treasure, and just not the kindest person. I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah.
I said this. My relationship with Thorin is just simply complicated, and there's really nothing else to say, I guess. I don't know.
So that was just one example of, you know, I didn't realize. And you think about, you know, the movies have been out for like a decade. You know, the first movie I think is 10 years old. So I didn't really think about how long that's kind of just been sitting there steeping in my subconscious.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess I also have had my perception shift, despite the fact that I had read the books before. I read them so long ago, I think, that as a child, that Bilbo was someone that I didn't really relate to. And that to me now is absurd, because he was the most relatable character, one of the most relatable characters I have read like at all. Me and him were just like, we were like this. It's kind of hard to describe. So that is not something I expected from this reread, because the movies, and again, I haven't watched the Hobbit movies in a while, but the movies did not dissuade me from that, because he was kind of like prissy is what I remember. Him just being prissy. And now I'm like, you know, the ways in which he was prissy make a lot of sense. Like, I really understand why he was the way that he was.
Well, there's Leia being all of us, right? Like I used to think I was an elf. Same girl.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
But so you kind of just touched on how the read changed for you from, you know, middle school or elementary school to now. And so that was I think that was probably my biggest takeaway, honestly, from the experience. Was I was really grateful to have done this read for the first time ever as an adult. Because I don't think that I would have appreciated it as much or on as many levels if I had read it as a kid.
Yeah. I can back you up 100% because that was my situation. I love the story. I love the dragon. I didn't understand. I mentioned this in the last episode or the episode before that, why the story didn't end when the dragon ended. Like there was all, you know, I didn't appreciate the battle at the end at all, even less than I did this time. Because again, I'm not a battles girly, but still, like there were so many things that I just glossed over or just didn't notice. Like the prose, the literary umami probably just went whoosh, right over my head back then. This time, no. This time we got to appreciate it. It was lovely.
Yeah. And the other piece of that is this is a book that I would have like consumed in a sitting. Like this book would have been done in a weekend, whether we're talking a 12-year-old me or 40-year-old me. So taking the time to have gone through it, think about each set of chapters and talk it through, it really did add a lot. Again, I get really impatient. I have a hard time with buddy reads, but I absolutely see the value now. And I'm looking forward to, our trek into Fellowship because it'll be better with a buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I like inhaled those books back when I read them for the first time. And I feel, if I recall right, at least Two Towers ends on, well, you know what? No, we're not going to spoil anything.
No.
We're not going to spoil anything. We're not going to talk about it. Basically, they kept me engaged. Let's put it that way. And so my non-reader sister cannot say the same. She, I believe, hasn't even started Fellowship. She maybe has finished The Hobbit, and I lent her / gave her a copy of the entire Hobbit / trilogy back during the pandemic. So we're trying to influence. We can't always influence, even if we're the best of influencers. What can I say?
Well, I hear you. Excuse me. I hear you. My random Noman also was not on board for The Hobbit, but he will be lightly following along for the Fellowship.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Not All Who Wonder Are Lost says, I've always known I'm a hobbit, partly due to my childhood battles with adults trying to make me wear shoes. That's same. Actually, we should have known based on that alone. Yes. You know what's way better than climbing trees with shoes? Climbing trees barefoot. Yeah. You can really get the toes in there, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, what can I say? I get it. Not same page, not all at one.
Tell me we didn't have the same childhood with one sentence.
Yeah, pretty much. Light Blinded Fool says Fellowship is a big step up in target audience, but that's not a spoiler. You see that from chapter 1. Well, we're not even starting with chapter 1, Light Blinded Fool. We're starting with the before chapter 1, which is actually almost as long as chapter 1, which I find hilarious. Very looking forward to seeing what that's honestly like. I do know part of the contents just because of some stuff that I've done for my content on TikTok, but I don't even remember what all is in that part because my child brain just yeeted it at some point for the core story.
So did you read Fellowship as around the same age as well?
Yeah, well, right. Yes, I read The Hobbit, and after I read The Hobbit, I was like, I wonder if this author's
There's
done more
more.
stuff. And so I got
Yeah.
on the library computer, back in the day in
Yeah.
the 90s.
And the box computer where the monitor is this long.
And I'm typing in Tolkien and holy, there's a trilogy that's like a, sequel kind of. So no, I almost immediately read the trilogy right after The Hobbit. So it was right through.
And have you reread it since?
So I think I reread it. I think I reread it in middle school. So I read for the first time, I want to say like right around like 4th or 5th grade. And then my mom is a teacher. I know I've said that before. And she was our English teacher. And I think it was 7th grade. And I did not get special treatment for the most part, but somehow I managed to convince her to have us read the trilogy as some of our reading assignments because they're classics. And so I read it one more time, basically. Although I feel like I probably lightly read it because I had already read it. You know what I mean? Whenever you've already read a book, you kind of yeah. So it was a light read, and then never since. So since I was a child, basically, I have not read them.
Great.
Yeah, I have watched the movies countless times.
Lot.
They're my favorite movies of all time, but I have not reread the series. I did read the Silmarillion last year though for the first time, so that was something else.
Yeah, we'll revisit that after we get done with Return.
Yeah. Honestly, the Silmarillion would probably be best in this format where you're like taking it in little bits.
And processing.
Well, that and it's like a history book in the sense that you get little snippets of things that happened in Middle Earth's history. So, it's not all one narrative, but I don't think that's a spoiler. It's just how it is. How it is.
I did want to acknowledge Random Gnomon had a question a while ago that it probably got lost about did we think that anything didn't really hold up when we were reading through. And I can only think of one topic that we touched on.
I think I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, although Light Blinded Fool also had a good point.
Oh, 2 then. Yes, I saw that too.
So the thing that popped up most for me when I was reading it was the casual fat shaming of Bomber by Thorin, and yelling at him and telling him not to make a fuss. And just the way that Thorin treated Bomber specifically, and a lot of times talking about that, he was too heavy to be carried, and sometimes it was figurative and sometimes it was literal. But either way, just the very casual fat shaming left a very poor taste in my mouth. And then the other point that Light Blinded Fool made, which was an excellent one, is there's
where are the girls?
One female character in the
there
read.
Was.
Nope, just kidding. No, there wasn't. I was like Galadriel. Galadriel is a named female character, but she is not anywhere in this story.
You know what? Bilbo's mom was mentioned, but she did not show up. Like she wasn't in the story. She was just talked about.
Yep.
And that's it. So that's why. And we'll see what happens at the end of the trilogy, but that's why I maintain, even though Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Tolkien has such a special place in my heart, The Wheel of Time is my number one. And part of that is the amazing women. It's men and women, and they're both incredibly important. Whereas in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, not so much.
Mm-mm.
I mean, they beefed up the women in both the Hobbit movie and the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies, and even
But do they pass the Bechdel test? Has that been a thing that you did?
I mean, it depends. So I don't in the extended editions, I think they do, because Eowyn talks to the little girl, and I think the little brother says the little girl's name at some point. So even under the stricter Bechdel test, which is two women have a the Kritter test is something else, but it's the stricter version of the Bechdel test is two women have a conversation that's not about a man. And so I think Eowyn talks to the little girl who gets rescued, like gets put on the horse. And she's just like, "Are you okay?" And the little girl's like, "Yes," or something like that happens. And so technically it passes, but it's so slight. It's not. It doesn't even count.
And that's even with that updated treatment 20 years ago.
Yeah. So that's those two. I agree. Bomber, the fat shaming, and I get that, it's a different time or whatever. That's always what people say when stuff like that happens with old stuff. But it's still just when you're reading it today, kind of like do we have to?
Yeah.
Thankfully, it didn't happen that often. And then I wish there were more ladies. That's all. That's basically it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Biggest complaints.
Which really wasn't that bad. You think about it.
No.
Again, he started these stories in the early 30s. It's almost 100 years old, 90 years old.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. And I guess that kind of leads us perfectly into, and I talked about this in the final episode, how much I effing loved this book. I loved this book. I remembered like loving the trilogy and like really enjoying The Hobbit. It's like the trilogy like overshadowed The Hobbit, but now that I'm reading The Hobbit first and really focusing on it, OMG, this book slaps so hard. I loved it. How did you feel about it reading it for the first time?
I mean, I loved it too. It had so much more depth to it than I expected from a children's story. So I got really sentimental as we got through those last few chapters. The return trek home, and just a couple of comments I think I made in the last episode that we recorded. Bomber. Bilbo's getting philosophical on the way home. He recites poetry, and Gandalf, I'm paraphrasing heavily, but Gandalf comments on how you are no longer the same. There was one that I really loved, which was, I don't remember exactly what he said, but Bilbo, Gandalf said, "We still have a long way home," essentially. And it's still a long road home. And Bilbo said, "But it is the last road." And I just, there's such nuance to that obviously I imbue it with it as the reader, but I'm so glad I didn't try to read this as a kid. This would mean nothing to me. I think you made a point once that, you must have just glazed over this part.
Yeah.
When you were in school. And I'm
1,000 times, yes.
Of course you would.
The fun's over.
Once you get a little mileage, once you get a little mileage on you, you're like, you really start to feel for Bilbo. And dude, I'm rooting for you to get back to your armchair. Trust me.
Yeah. With all your stuff being sold, the nightmare that is trying to get it back, like reclaim you got to hire lawyers. It's just so much bad stuff.
And forever being known as slightly odd.
Yeah, which is fine with me, honestly. That's been my whole life. You know what I mean? Because I grew up, I played sports, and so I was hanging out with all the athletes, but then I was also, bringing a book to read after practice and stuff, on the bus to the games and all that stuff. And so I'm used to being a little odd, but that's okay.
And that's good.
That's what
balance.
It's all about balance. Wolf Brother in the chat actually has a good point. So he says that he loved the Battle of Wits most of all. And my question is, which one? Bilbo and the Dragon or Bilbo and Gollum? I guess we would call that probably the riddles would be Gollum and Bilbo, maybe. But let me know which one you're talking about. So I want to ask you, Jessica, the chapters, at least at the beginning, were very much like, now this is happening. Now, we're meeting the dwarves. Now we're meeting the ogres, right? They were ogres.
Yes.
Yeah, the ogres.
Trolls.
And now the troll. Thank you. I knew that was wrong, but I had orcs on my brain. And so, trolls. Now we're meeting the trolls. Now we're going to Elrond's house. Now we're meeting Beorn. So it's very almost episodic,
Mhm.
especially at the beginning. So do you have a favorite episode of The Hobbit?
I think that from an imagery perspective, when they first go to Last Homely House, it was just so gorgeous.
Yeah.
The descriptions through there were just fantastic, and there was more of that. Um, from a narrative perspective, there was some really great chunks from there. Um, I just blanked. I'm
No,
sorry.
let me go. Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of agree with Wolf Brother that for me, I want to say the Battle of Wits with the Dragon, when Bilbo is
Mhm.
talking to the dragon and like puffing himself up and giving himself all these titles, and then like kind of tricking the dragon into revealing its weak spot, but then accidentally revealing that he got help from Lakesound. All of that is like so well written and fun, and you're
Mhm.
just nervous because there's a dragon there, but
Mhm.
Bilbo's protected because he's got his ring on and all this other stuff. Like, I love that scene. I
Mhm.
loved Riddles in the Dark, but
Mhm.
it's got this creepiness that I guess like that's the only thing that takes away from it. Tolkien was so effective at just freaking me out and making me really nervous that that's the
Mhm.
only thing that sets that maybe behind the dragon scene ever
Mhm.
so slightly. And then honestly, I, God, I don't know. I'm just picking all the scenes that are like out of the movies or like the iconic, whatever scenes. But I like the troll scene too. I think that's really fun. The like throwing of the voice
But I
and
mean, to be fair, when we got to that part of the reading, like we were both so stoked when we got to the Gollum chapter
it's
and when we
true,
got to the Smaug chapter, honestly. Like we were
true.
both super excited when we got to that part of the read. It
Yeah,
wasn't just about the movie.
true. Yeah. So those were probably the highlights for me. The both
Mhm.
of the battle. Well, brother, you nailed it. The Battle of the Wits. What about? So yeah.
Mhm.
So you like the last homely house, which for me is like I'm such a like I'm not a battles girly, but I'm not
Mhm.
also not incredibly patient, and because that felt like a deep breath before the storm,
Mhm.
kind of right before they
Yeah,
entered
before they do
into the
anything really,
wilds
yeah.
or whatever. To me, I was like, okay, let's go. You know what I mean? I had the same thing with Beorn's house. I was like, okay, let's go. Like, let's move on to the next thing. Um, but the
I
imagery
mean,
was beautiful. Like, don't get me
yeah,
wrong.
and they even started that chapter that way, right? Like the the narrator told us, there's nothing fun to say. They were there for 2 weeks and basically caught their breath, and they stayed for a long time, but there's nothing fun to say about it.
Yeah, except for the maps thing.
Except for the
Elrond's like,
map. Yeah,
you
the
didn't see this?
convenience of the map.
Yeah,
If
that
I
was
had
fun.
to give an answer, it's really, really corny, but my favorite part is Bilbo's journey. Like the transformation that Bilbo goes through in finding himself, in standing up for himself, the things that he faces in terms of being a better person, overcoming fear, not being a doormat, but also still navigating and trying to do good things for his friends, even though his friends are, on the precipice of making really bad choices. Bilbo's journey is really the thing that I love the most. So it's really hard for me, but all of my favorite beats kind of point back to that one factor.
Okay, so I guess this leads right into something we also were inevitably going to talk about, which is
Mhm.
who's your favorite character in the book?
I mean, I think we should say who's our favorite character besides Bilbo, right? Because I think
Okay.
we both are pretty established as heavy Bilbo sympathists.
Hashtag Bilbo Stan. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hashtag Bilbo is our king. So yeah, Bilbo number one. But
Mhm.
then
Honestly, I think the one that I enjoyed the most and was the most interesting was Beorn. So Beorn was
okay.
interesting in the movie, but I, for whatever reason, reading about him gave him enough more depth that I really thought he was very cool. So
He
I think
was
it's
very cool.
Beorn.
He's just very gruff. I kind of like respect the like, I'm
Mhm.
not gonna take any crap from you, but tell me tell me your story. I want to hear whatever. Like he's a cool guy. And at the end when he rolls into the battle
Last battle, yeah.
and takes out the big
Not
bad.
the last battle, wrong.
Not the last battle. He
wrong
takes out
property.
The big bad because he was like, "Oh, you guys killed the king goblin or the great goblin or whatever." Almost like, man, I wish that could have been me. And then he ends up getting to kill the great goblin's spawn.
Son.
But
Yeah,
it's a nice touch. I like that touch. Okay, so who's my? I think mine is probably, and I'm so terribly bad with names. So correct me if this is not the right dwarf. But I think my number 2 is Balin, the nice dwarf.
Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love him. He went from like being cute, to like, giggling at things and whatever to like eventually just being like the best friend that Bilbo could have asked for. Like he wanted them. He considered, I guess, all of them to be his friend, but the true friend that he had on that trip was Balin. And I guess Gandalf. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about Gandalf. Ooh. Oh man. No, okay, I'm sorry. Balin, you're number 3. Gandalf is my number 2, actually, because he was just fun and feisty and unexpected. And some of my favorite scenes involved, like the throwing of the voice with the trolls, super fun. The fact that he just disappeared, like some of his like his disses, like he had some of the sickest burns in the books, if I recall.
Yes.
And he was the one that started it all. So yes, Balin, I apologize, but you are incredible. Gandalf, though, was my number 2, I think. We talked about how a lot of the leaders in this book were kind of like a little complicated at best, but like a little meh or not as good as you would expect them to be. We're talking Thorin, the Elf King, Thranduil, though he's not named in the book, which I think is hilarious. Yeah. The head of Lake Town, whatever his name is,
Master.
The Master. See, I'm terrible with names. But then we got Bard, who was solid. So who, I guess, like, would you, if you had to live under one of those leaders, who would it be?
Definitely Bard.
Oh yeah.
Okay. if I'm not living in Hobbiton, I'm living under Bard, because the rest of them seem terrible. And there is a point that Leia mentioned, weren't we all elves? At one point it would have absolutely been Elrond, because I absolutely would have identified as an elf. And now I'm like, no.
Man, Bard is a really good choice, but I think I still would have gone with Elrond. If it's because, like, the hobbits don't have a king or whatever. Bilbo might as well be their king. Obviously not, because he's a bit of an outcast now. But I mean, living in Rivendell, whew, and Elrond is so nice. I mean, the description of him in the book was just like, imagine the best person you can think of. This is Elrond. Welcome to Rivendell in the last homely house.
And he's done some really awesome stuff, but we're not going to talk about it in this book.
We're not going to talk about it here. Just trust me. Just trust me. He's pretty great. So yeah, we only got Elrond very briefly, though. That was incredibly temporary. But yeah, I think the difference between movie Thranduil and the Elf King was interesting. I feel like they were pretty similar, the vibes. I remember the Lee Pace's Thranduil being really intense, and I feel
I think I found him just a little bit more menacing, honestly, but also
in the books or in the movies.
No, Lee Pace's portrayal I thought was pretty menacing.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I agree.
But I think that they added, they kind of amped up his backstory a little bit to account for that. But I will say also, like, when we first meet the Elven King, when he takes all of the dwarves hostage, he's very, no business, and I have no problem throwing you in cells and throwing away the key until you, tell me what I need to hear. But he was a little bit more moderate by the time it came time for the battle.
Yeah. He definitely felt slightly different by the end of the book. He went from I mean, a hostage taker to somebody who's like, "Oh, Bilbo, you're the best, man. We
naming
love you.
Elf friend." And, you're much more magnanimous now than you were when we first met.
Right, but I guess that's what the promise of treasure will do for you, or like the inevitable, like acquisition of treasure will do for you. Okay, so let's see. So who's the best villain? What villain did you like the most?
It has to be Smaug. I mean, Gollum was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Smaug was intense.
Yeah.
So Gollum and Smaug both had really smart battle of wits moments, and then
Mm-hmm.
you add Smaug's physical presence and dominance,
Yeah.
and so Smaug takes it by a nose.
By a nose. I agree that Smog was just impressive. Through the
Mm-hmm.
page, he just kind of jumped off the page, and I think that Bilbo, LOL. I think that Gollum did too. Like you
Mm-hmm.
felt them both in the room with you, essentially, whenever you were reading about them, which
Yeah.
was awesome. You know, the testament to Tolkien's writing, but there's just something about a dragon. You know, it's a tough thing to beat. I think. Though
Yeah.
we'll get more Gollum, in the future, so we're not done with him yet.
I was just realized, like, in the moment that we named our podcast "But Are There Dragons?" So obviously, we're gonna slant dragon a little bit.
A little bit, but that's
A little
okay.
bit.
Um, oh my gosh, Wolf Brother, the way you spell Gollum, just like it's screaming Golem to me from the Wheel of Time books, and
Mm-hmm.
it's distracting. No, I mean, it's fine. But you're right that Gollum did technically probably win as compared to Smaug because he's still
Mm-hmm.
alive at the end of the book, and Smaug isn't. Daedalus asking, but are there dragons? The answer is there's one. There was a dragon. It was very exciting to finally get to meet Smog after
It was.
like
He did
80.
not disappoint.
He didn't, even though he had much briefer time on the page than I initially expected, than I originally
Mm.
expected. He left an impact. He left a mark essentially.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah. That's actually, I know I said this in our episode 0, and I'm not sure if I said it on any of the other episodes, but Smaug is the reason that I read The Hobbit in the first place because he was on the cover that I saw at the library. So shout out to Smaug for luring me in. Who knew that
Mm-hmm.
the dragon is what was going to get me? I mean, yeah, Daniel, dragons were your gateway drug to fantasy.
Absolutely.
Same, same. So same
Yes.
page.
It was kind of even odds if there was a dragon on the cover or horses, which, in a lot of fantasy stories, they're on horseback. So you probably got me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess Eye of the World.
Yeah.
Horses. At least the Daryl K. Sweet cover, which,
Yes.
can't be beat. Let's be honest. It's something else.
For
If
sure.
you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen the original artwork for the Eye of the World, you should go look because it's amazing. Leia says, who doesn't love dragons? Thorin and Bard, but
Facts.
understandably in their case. Push through bad books because of dragons. Yeah, fair. Yeah, it's so funny how Spog he was a focal point in this entire book, but we didn't meet him until like the very end. That was so interesting to me. But
Mm,
I guess you can't go see the big bad right away. You got to build up to it.
no.
Bilbo had to find himself.
Yes. And ultimately, he nor the dwarves, neither were the ones to beat the dragon.
Yeah. Although Bilbo got the alley-oop. Bilbo got the assist at the very
Yes.
least. So,
And Bilbo also made it so that the war got won. So, you know what I mean? Bilbo
right.
created a pathway towards a bloodless truce, which meant that they were there and ready to fight when the other supposedly 3 armies showed up.
I do wonder if they would have stayed at odds with each other if the goblins showed up, if Bilbo
Mhm.
hadn't taken the action that he took.
Hmm. I mean, I tend to think yes, because everybody seemed very set on their path. You know what I mean? Nobody seemed willing to really compromise, apart from Bard, who thought he was already compromising by asking for what he thought was a very reasonable amount.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tricky. I do think Bilbo was the brains of the operation most of the time when it came to the dwarves, which is so after Gandalf left, I guess. After Gandalf left.
Even though he was only a very small person after all.
Very small, but mighty, it turns out. I kind of love that development. He goes from, as I said earlier, prissy to still prissy, but also kind of awesome. Not kind of, definitely awesome. Also very impressive and awesome, and a certified bona fide adventurer.
Yes.
Gotta respect him for that. Yeah.
I'll miss him in our next leg of the journey.
Yeah. I mean, he'll be there at first. But yeah, it's going to be different. Getting introduced to a bunch of new characters. Introduced. There will be characters that we haven't read about yet. Are you excited about the prospect of reading about all the characters we've seen in the movies?
I am. I always felt like, I think you and I might have had this discussion before, but this is the mystique behind it. I believe that there's all kinds of lore in these books that I haven't been privy to. So I feel like I'm about to crack the lid on the deep magics and see, behind the scenes a little bit.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to you seeing all of it and looking forward to revisiting it since I have been thoroughly corrupted by the movies. Anything, well, I know some of the differences, so I'll be expecting them, but I don't remember. I'm sure I don't know all of them anymore.
I will tell you that last weekend, I think, I did a Hobbit rewatch as a reward.
And
the
animated one?
I did both. I did the animated and I did the movies.
That's a time commitment.
Yeah, well, not all at once, not all in one sitting.
Oh, okay.
And it was so hard not to go because it's actually been a minute. It's been a healthy minute or two since I've done a LOTR rewatch. So I was like, oh, I'd really like to watch it. Nope, gotta stay strong.
That'll be your reward. That'll be your reward.
It will be. In 16 years when we're done.
It's not gonna be that bad. The Hobbit took us what? How many episodes? We had six episodes. And
we really, yeah.
Fellowship is a little around twice as long, so 12 episodes. That's 3 months or something. I don't know. Somebody else do the math.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 12 would be 3 months if we keep going with the weekly drop like we've been doing, which I think both of us are hoping to do.
Yeah. We are for sure. So yeah, we could finish we could be done with Lord of the Rings by the end of the year. Think about it that way. That's not that bad. Okay. Yeah. Just it's not like one of the first time reader Wheel of Time podcasts, because they're in it forever.
And honestly, I'm grateful because I could never be that disciplined for that long. Those books are bigger and there's more of them. And I definitely have favorites and play favorites and read through pieces faster than others. I don't skip. I never skip because I'm too completionist for that.
Yeah. Wouldn't feel real.
Would not feel real. Doesn't count. Can't count it if you didn't read it.
Agreed.
But I would be so overwhelmed to be a first time reader.
Yeah, I agree. But I highly recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. I'll be here as a support. You can here are my digits. You can DM me and I'll be there rooting for you.
Yeah. First time readers, mad respect, but I'd the first time reader podcast is the one that because you have to slow down even oh my gosh. So yeah, being a first time reader of the Wheel of Time is amazing. I assume being a podcaster, not so much. But I don't know. We'd have to ask.
There are some really awesome people doing it. All of the ones that I've met, Danny and Brett, Allie and Gus, Alan and his crew, all of them, when I've met with them, they're all incredibly friendly and nice and having a good time and stick to their guns. And I'm like, good for you guys, because I would have a really hard time being that contained and that disciplined.
Yeah. Just though, I've had such a good time doing The Hobbit. I feel like it was a great pace, honestly. Yeah, I was a big fan of it. And I do feel like The Hobbit goes by so quickly compared to other books that I've read of late. Like I reread the Stormlight Archive this year. Oh boy, those are long. Those are as I say that as a Wheel of Time reader, like they just feel and are. I love them, but they're so long. And so going from that, and I've been rereading the Wheel of Time slowly this year too. Going from those to The Hobbit was literally like, what is even happening? This is all incredibly digestible, super, super fast. Like there's no fluff. I mean, there's a little bit of fluff. The songs, you know, arguably fluff. I guess we haven't talked about the songs yet. How do you feel about them in the end?
I mean, I feel good about them, but kind of like with the Theater of the Mind, like I don't immediately put them to music. I do feel tempted to get the Andy Serkis version because I would like to hear them.
Yeah. He sings them. It's lovely. Like I've said this before, I'll say it again 1,000 times. Andy Serkis's version of the audiobooks, at least of The Hobbit, superb, spectacular. I haven't looked to see if he's won any awards for it, but I would have voted for him if I had voting rights.
What are those called? They must do voice acting. They must do narration.
Outies. I think so, because Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, who do the Wheel of Time, they won one, I thought, recently. Well, and Rosamund Pike won one for The Eye of the World also, which she did recently.
Yeah, so. He must have. I mean, he's just incredible, and he's so immersed in that world.
Yeah, he knows what's up. I've said this before, but his impressions, it's like he's doing impressions of the people, the actors who are playing the roles in the respective movies, right? So he sounds like Lee Pace's Thranduil. He sounds kind of like Benedict Cumberbatch's Smaug, though that one would be really, really hard to emulate. Honestly, probably the hardest one out of all of them.
Well, he had said, like, he really worked his voice to get that low of a register. And I'm sure there was some auto-tune to make it, super gravelly.
Yeah. Okay. I love this question from Random Gnome. If you could take the best part of each author and build the perfect author with Robert Jordan, Tolkien, and Sanderson, what would you take from each author?
Well, I feel like I'm a little bit more versed in two of those than I am in the third. But generally, I would take RJ's women, Tolkien's world building. And I really do like Sanderson's humor. Tolkien's world building and also tying up loose ends. Like, I haven't had a book be so satisfying in the ending in so long. There was nothing. Thank you, Dana Luhu. It is called an outie.
Nice.
An outie.
So. Yeah.
So I do tend to like Sanderson's humor and wit. RJ had a lot more female representation. Not always the best, but at least it was present. And Tolkien gave me so much from the literary umami perspective. And just neatly tying up all of those loose ends. I really can't remember the last time that I walked away from a book going, nope, you gave me everything. Thank you.
Amazing. So I think I would do Robert Jordan's world building, because when I go there, it feels like I'm going home. Like it feels like a real place with real people. I would take Tolkien's prose, because I found his writing to be delicious, just beautiful and poetic, and I don't care if it's slightly old-fashioned. I didn't feel like it was. Like, I felt like it was perfect. And then, this is so bizarre, but I would take Sanderson's, I'm trying to think of how to say this. Sanderson's, oh my gosh, like, awareness of people's feelings and Sanderson's modern sensibilities, which is so funny because he's a Mormon, like, right? And so you don't necessarily,
but he's worked on himself. Like, nobody's perfect. He's worked on it.
So he uses like sensitivity and other like beta readers, right? So he has like mental health beta readers. He's got like people who look at how he's writing women. He's got all these things that he really wants to do right. And I love his conscientiousness. That's what I'm looking for. I couldn't think of the word, but his conscientiousness is just lovely. Because there are there are a couple things in Robert Jordan's books that I'm like, God, I don't think that's how it would have went down based on how I know these characters. There are, there and obviously in Tolkien there's minimal women. So and the fat shaming, which again, product of his time or whatever. So those, that's what I would do. Tolkien's prose, Jordan's world building, and Brandon Sanderson's conscientiousness.
Nice.
Yeah. Empathy. Perfect. Wolf Brother, another great word for it. Yes, absolutely.
Empathy.
Exactly. What about chat? Weigh in. Oh, Wolf Brother did. Sanderson's magic systems. Oh, good one. RJ's world building. Seconded. Amen. And Tolkien's humor. I really like Tolkien's humor too.
Yeah. So I really wanted to go back to your comment about his prose. So I will say that that was something that I was just mildly aware of, because I am someone who like grew up reading Shakespeare and stuff, and had many contemporaries who didn't like reading projects like that because they're challenging, because they're not in a modern day vernacular.
Yeah.
Which I do understand. It's never been a barrier for me, but I was aware of it because I'm like, this is a 90-year-old story. Like the prose could be unwieldy. But generally speaking, it really wasn't a barrier for me, except for that one section that I told you about. And you had mentioned right before then that the POV had changed for the first time. We had left either a Bilbo or dwarf dominant storyline. And I was like, I remember looking at my Kindle going like, when did we get so clunky? Like, why do I feel like we're talking to a tax accountant? I don't understand. And then you said that in our episode and it clicked, and I was like, that's what it was. So kudos to him. It was a voice change, but I was pleasantly surprised that the prose wasn't more of a barrier.
Yeah, it was a bonus for me. I do. Yeah, it's like an incredibly easy to read, and we'll see if that continues on into the trilogy.
I have been told that Lord of the Rings is a more challenging read, so I'm trying not to let that sway me. But I have been told that it's harder to read.
Only time will tell. We'll see.
Right.
It's not written for
my experience.
For the children.
It is not.
I'd like all three of them to talk to Ursula K. Le Guin before they write their next one. Yeah, that's seconded. Sanderson, Sanderson's magic, says Random Noman, Tolkien's world building and history, and RJ's handling of scale. Okay. Nice. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I feel like RJ's world building and Tolkien's world building are both just delectable. They're so good.
So I think that for me, when I said world building, I really meant the prose part, because I'm thinking specifically of the literary umami pieces. He can describe a hollow in a wood, and I find that to be incredibly appealing, the way that he accomplished that.
And he just drops you right into the world. Yes. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I probably really meant the prose versus world building, but all I could think of was all of the different things that he described that I'm highlighting going, this is a favorite this week.
Yeah.
They were really good.
That's fair.
Random Noman is just a little salty because this is the first book, and I don't know how long that I've read that I actually looked at chapters and used them as guideposts to how much I would actually read. It's a little bit of a running joke.
You just inhale. You don't.
Yeah. So I had done a TikTok about this ages ago, actually. He said something about he was really tired and he was just trying to get to the end of his chapter. And I was like, oh gosh, I fall asleep mid-sentence all the time. And he goes, you don't finish the chapter? I said, no, I don't finish the chapter even when I don't fall asleep. I'll finish what I'm reading and step away at any time. And he looked at me like I was a monster that I just popped out of a book. So it's a little bit of a running joke with us. And we talked about it back and forth. And I was like, why do you need to use chapters? The serving size is the book. The serving size isn't a chapter. The serving size is the book.
No. If I'm reading a physical copy, which I will admit doesn't happen almost ever anymore because now I'm an audiobook girly. But when I am reading a physical book back in the day, which happened all the time, my general rule of thumb was I would keep reading until the end of the chapter unless I got to a page that ended in a period, like at the end of a paragraph. And then I could bookmark, the next page. Ideally, the page would be like the second page, you know what I mean? So that you could flip the page, put the bookmark in there, and then start fresh on the new page. That was like...
So I will admit that was my preference when I read physical copies. But as I've gotten to Kindle...
Do you just like drop a pin? How does that even work? I don't use Kindle.
I don't. I fall asleep. I literally fall asleep mid-sentence a lot.
Okay.
So it's problematic. But I just got out of the habit. And also I read a lot of works that didn't have chapter titles. So part of what spawned this is we were having a conversation about about all the chapters where the boys are doing their trek with Tom and how each chapter was the same. And I was like, oh, I guess I didn't really pay attention because I don't really go by chapters. It doesn't work because she's a monster. There it is. The chapter is how the author wants me to take the story. Yes, sir. You have made that point clear.
Okay, but don't keep going.
So it's just a way in which we're different. And it's really funny to me because of how much it sends him into outer space. And I had admittedly got to a point where I didn't even look at titles anymore because I read a bunch of books that didn't actually have titles for chapter titles. Like it was just chapter, one,
like one.
You know what I'm saying? So I had really just kind of gotten out of the habit of caring about chapters. And he just thought,
interesting.
I'm sorry, Dana Lou, it probably isn't fascinating at all, but
I find it fascinating. But
I think it's funny to hear how different people approach how they consume.
Well, but it's different by medium too. Audiobooks, yes. I can stop it whenever. I'll just pause it, and then I usually will click the back 10 seconds so I have the context, and then we keep going. Easy
Which
peasy.
I think Random Noman said that's a thing that he does too, because audio is his preferred method for when he's traveling for work, for example. There are other people that they're only catching what they can read when they can read it, and so they have to be more flexible. And I think that's when I developed. I think that's when I developed that particular habit. When you're a single working mom who I might be able to read for 10 minutes. I can't be fussy. I get what I get.
Well, and Random Noman, think about it this way. Whenever we were looking at the Fellowship of the Ring to decide what we were going to read first, you want to know how long chapter 1 is via audiobook, which I assume translates into many, many pages. It is over an hour long. So that's a lot of pages to be able to, at least that's a pretty copy. In this day and age, sitting down for that long without any distractions, that's sometimes it's hard to come by. But I would find a period at the end of the page though, so I'm with you on that. I need a decent ending point.
I mean, it says that book 1 chapter 1 is only 20 pages.
What? Why is it an hour long on Audible? Okay.
We should compare notes.
We need to compare notes.
We don't. I'm like, it's not the last battle. We're not doing this.
No, yeah, that's crazy. Hold on. Let me see.
I won't be reading it on this, obviously, because I'm going to read it on my Kindle so that I can highlight and do all my notes.
Chapter 1, book 1, A Long Expected Party, 1 hour and 11 minutes.
I wonder if it has tons of songs.
Oh, and he's singing them? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I'll look at one of my copies too, just to see.
Yeah. Anyways.
Because we get on to talk for an hour about 10 pages of the Fellowship of the Ring. That maybe won't work.
Thank you all for tuning in to this riveting content where we're looking at our book.
Hey, you know what? It's a good little how we read covers. The last battle is 9.5 hours on audiobook. That's a perfect example of a chapter that you cannot read in one sitting.
And that is notably the last time I cared. So when I finally made it to A Memory of Light in March of last year, I got to chapter 36, I think the chapter before it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I can't start this chapter I'll have to wait and do it fresh in the morning. And it took me forever to fall asleep because I was like, but I knew that it was 200 because I was reading on Kindle. So page approximation works better for me. It was about 200 pages or something, like the size of a short book.
Yeah. Yeah. Half the length of Fellowship,
Yeah.
says Light-Minded Fool. Wow. Yeah. So we were talking about the tomes that are the Stormlight Archive and the Wheel of Time books. There's
Those
your
are some
example.
thick boys.
Thick boys. And
Yes.
Fellowship isn't quite so thick. So, we're coming up on our normal episode length time, or actually we've surpassed it. So,
Yeah.
and since we're, I believe, planning on posting this on our podcast so people can listen to it as well as see it. So I guess I usually like to do kind of final thoughts whenever I'm doing live streams like this, final thoughts, takeaways, things you're looking forward to, whatever you want to talk about just for this last little part, because we finished The Hobbit and it feels good. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is, woohoo, we did it. Like I'm really
Same.
genuinely excited. I'm super proud of myself. This book is this author is like the boogeyman under the bed, so it feels really good to have gotten through it, and I'm pleasantly surprised about how much I really enjoyed this format, and I'm super excited for us to get started on the next one. And there's so many incredible pieces of prose that I'll take with me forever from that read. Just beautiful little moments from that read that I get to have forever now. So
I love that. Yeah, I guess for me, it's been so nice getting to read it again as an adult. I've mentioned that before. I think there are so many things that I appreciated 1,000 times more because I read it as an adult and not a kid. I would recommend this book to literally all ages. And actually, I don't think I don't think I said this on our last recording because I'm pretty sure it happened after this, but I had a birthday party this past weekend, I think, or the weekend before. What is time? Anyways, it was a while ago. It was more than a week ago. So I guess it was 2 weekends ago. But we did the the non-extended edition Lord of the Rings movies. And a friend of mine had his kids over for part of it. And one of his kids, I think, is 9. And I literally grabbed The Hobbit off the shelf and was like, tell me what you think. I gave it to her. I'm actually going to Disney World with that family in February, so you best believe that I'm going to be asking for a book report. So I mean it when I say I think it's good for children because that's about the age that I read it, and they're not going to appreciate it the same way that the adults will appreciate it. So if you are an adult and you haven't yet read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings because you're like, it's past time, I should have read it already, it's for kids, or I've already seen the movie, so I'm set. No, you have not, and you are not set. You need to read the book because, first of all, the book is far and away better than the Hobbit movies. Second of all, Jessica can attest to this now. It is beautifully written and distinguishable from anything probably that you've ever read, even though it set the foundation for it. And it's just worth your time. And it's not that much time. So it would be worth it if it was way more time than it takes. So you should just read The Hobbit, okay? It's one of my favorite books of all time. And if you're not reading it, if you haven't read it, then you're missing out. It's basically where I'm at.
So I would just say ditto, all of that. Like, yes, definitely read it. If you're somebody like me who, I've never read it and I feel dumb going back and read it now, don't feel dumb. Just go back and read it. Give it a chance.
Yeah. So
what's the catchphrase?
Oh,
yes. So never laugh at a live dragon is the one that has gotten the most votes.
Mm-hmm.
So my partner in crime and I haven't actually discussed yet what our final decision is, or if we're going to change it up per season. So TBD.
But for tonight's stream, since that one got the most votes for our season 1 of But Are There Dragons, I think it's the right sign-off phrase, so we'll save it. I'm going to do my best without a script to do our closing remarks. First of all, I want to thank everyone who was in the chat. You guys made it super fun. I'm super glad that you asked questions and had comments, and I look forward to doing more live recordings, hopefully in the future. Obviously not every time, but definitely the season wrap party will definitely be live, and then maybe some other ones. We'll see if we have, some special occasions or whatever. But yeah, so thank you for tuning in to the wrap party for The Hobbit for season 1 of But Are There Dragons? Your hosts, me, Kritter XD, and Jessica Sadai / Shelf Indulgence, very much appreciate your support. And we would ask that if you're not following us yet on our social media platforms, we're But Are There Dragons pretty much everywhere, except we are But Dragons Pod on X.
1 T.
Only 1 T. But Dragons Pod, only 1 T over on X. And then, yeah, you can find me at Kritter XD basically everywhere. And you can find Jessica at Shelf Indulgence and Jessica Sadai on TikTok and X and Instagram. So we're all over the place. So don't forget to give us a follow and all of that. And for those of you who are sticking around primarily on the podcast platforms, we love that you're here and listening, and we hope you continue listening into future seasons. So Jessica, any last words? You want to do the sign-off phrase since it was yours?
Sure. I would just echo all that. We love all the interaction that we've gotten for a brand new pod. We really appreciate everybody who's interacting with us, whether it be real time, after the fact, on YouTube, in Critter's Discord, whatever it may be. We love all the interaction and having buddies to read along with. So hopefully you'll keep coming with us, but we love it when you check in with us no matter what. So that's it for us today. We're still workshopping catchphrases for season 2, so keep an eye out for that wherever you get your podcasts or on here on our YouTube channel. So tonight's catchphrase is never laugh at live dragons. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye, guys.